I hear you guys loud and clear in the comments. Even if you can buy these new GPUs, pricing is nowhere near what us reviewers are quoting in our reviews. So does that change whether they're worth it or not? Take the RTX 3080 for example, which should be a $699 card, but pricing for the aftermarket boards is commonly around that $900 mark. The only problem here is that we don't really know what pricing and availability looks like until these cards actually launch. So the best that we can really do is test them and present that information to you at launch, so you at least have that to work from. But after seeing the huge price discrepancy between the RTX 3060's MSRP of $329 and the actual pricing of listed cards, which are in excess of $500, I felt like my own review became instantly invalidated. So today we're going to take a look at what you can actually expect to pay for these new GPUs, take a look at the performance and the value that you'd be getting, and whether they are still worth it or not. To be clear, this video is neither a rant about the current GPU pricing situation or an encouragement to pay outrageous prices. I want to have a productive discussion about whether these new GPUs still make sense at their actual listed pricing right now. And since we're on the note of the RTX 3060, let's start with that one first. So I'd actually planned a video between three RTX 3060 models, the Gigabyte Eagle, the Asus Strix, and the MSI Gaming X. But after seeing what these cards were actually priced at, that comparison became completely irrelevant. The RTX 3060 is already a tough sell within the 30 series lineup with roughly RTX 2060 Super to 2070 performance. So you have to ask yourself, would you have paid $500 US for an RTX 2060 Super? Definitely not. My advice here is that unless you can get a 3060 for $350 US or under, it's just not worth it. Funnily enough, any more than that and you're actually approaching 3060 Ti territory. Speaking of which, it is actually possible to buy a 3060 Ti at its MSRP of $399 US, but that's only if you get very lucky with a Founders Edition model, which aren't even available in all regions. Pricing for custom 3060 Ti cards also seems to be around that $500 mark, like the custom 3060s, with some models even in excess of $600. So referring back to my launch day review, the 3060 Ti performs about in line with the $700 RTX 2080 from last generation, but to be fair, that card didn't offer very good value at all. A more productive comparison would be against the Radeon 5700 XT, which commonly sold for around the $450 mark and offered tremendous value at that price. So $500 then for a 3060 Ti doesn't actually look so bad. Sure, it's $100 over MSRP, which is quite a lot, but if you're sick of waiting, it's not a terrible deal. Once you begin approaching $600 though, the 3060 Ti begins to resemble just slightly better value than a GTX 1080 Ti, which would be fine if it was a 4-year-old GPU. And that's where the 3070 comes in, with listings in excess of $600 US for what should be a $500 card. No doubt more than a few of you have gotten your hands on a Founders Edition model if you were extremely lucky, and if it was even available in your region to start with, but for most of the custom cards out there, expect to pay between $600 and $650. And at that pricing, the value of the 3070 is still overall not bad, with performance about 15% faster than a 3060 Ti, so paying about 15% more would make sense. Some would even justify slightly more given how close the performance is to the $1,000 plus RTX 2080 Ti from last generation, but I think the main point here is to not pay too much more than a 3060 Ti or get too close to the 3080, whatever that pricing looks like in your particular region. Now before we go any further, I know what a lot of you are thinking. These cards aren't even in stock at this pricing anyway, and you would be correct. At this very moment, no, they're not, but stock does frequently refresh, so you'll need to stay notified and keep up to date for when new stock does come in, maybe even buying them in store on specific days if possible. If you don't take my word for it, check out this poll that I ran a couple of weeks ago with a good chunk of you guys actually getting your hands on the new GPUs. Also, in my upcoming video where I check out some of your gaming setups, I was really surprised by how many of you actually had RTX 30 series GPUs. So those comments about Nvidia making like 3 RTX 3080s in total, they just aren't true. And with that in mind, let's actually talk about the RTX 3080. So same thing here, $699 US for the Founders Edition model if you get really lucky with a restock or a pre-order or even manage to buy it in store, which would be seriously lucky. This would be more of the unlikely scenario that you'd be able to get your hands on a Founders Edition model. Most likely, availability of the custom cards is what's going to pop up a lot more frequently, and those are priced at $850 plus. And just to be clear, this isn't scalper pricing, which you'd more likely see close to the $1,000 mark on somewhere like eBay. This is just really elevated pricing for AIB cards at retail stores. But to play devil's advocate here, even if you were to pay $1,000 US for an RTX 3080, you'd still be getting better value than an RTX 2080 Ti. Speaking of which, was priced at around $1,000 to $1,200 and offered anywhere between 15 to 30% less performance depending on the title and the resolution. Again, I'm not recommending that you actually pay that sort of money because you'd be paying about $300 to $200 more than what you should be, just comparing it to the value of the previous gen 2080 Ti for some extra scope. And then we have the RTX 3090, which is actually one of the more in-stock cards that I'm seeing out there in the wild, mostly because it's super expensive anyway, even at the $1,500 MSRP, and because the 24 gigabytes of video memory probably isn't useful for that many people. There's not much reasonable advice that I can give here, but the custom boards are going to land around that $1,700 to $2,000 mark. At this point, I think we can agree the only people buying the 3090 are those with a truckload of disposable income and they just want the best of the best, and also those who actually need that much video memory for their particular line of work. And the difference between paying $1,500 and $2,000 honestly probably isn't a big deal. So what about the AMD Radeon 6000 cards like the 6800 XT? Well, AMD's stock situation appears significantly worse than Nvidia's. Again, referring back to that poll that I ran a couple of weeks ago, the number of you in comparison that own Radeon 6000 cards is extremely slim. Personally, I think the whole AMD versus Nvidia has a lot less to do with it, and it's more about what cards are actually available. If you really like Nvidia, but the 6800 XT was the only card available, of course, you would just get the 6800 XT. Something that might be a bit of a fun fact for you guys is that I have a lot of RTX 30 series cards here for testing and for review, but I do not own a single Radeon 6000 GPU. My review units from AMD were snatched up pretty much immediately after the review was done, and I haven't been able to buy a single one since. I have, on the other hand, at least managed to purchase a 3090, which I liquid cooled for my personal system, a 3060 Ti that I used for a recent mini ITX build, and also a recent 3070 for a friend. And at least for the Radeon 6800 and 6800 XT listings that I can see online, the pricing is just seriously out of this world, about $300 dearer than the competing 30 series cards. That might differ slightly depending on your region, but globally, the RTX 30 series do at least look a little bit more attainable. So that leaves us in a really interesting spot for upcoming GPU reviews, such as the upcoming Radeon 6700 XT. That's supposed to be a $480 GPU, but I just don't think that's being realistic. I will say, at least from a reviewer's perspective, the desire to do like really in-depth GPU benchmarks with analysis based on value between the MSRP of different GPUs and the frame rate per dollar, it has really evaporated and diminished after each GPU launch. Sure, we can still test the absolute performance of these cards, and that's great, still useful for the consumer 100%, but any closing statement or recommendation based off of the MSRP of the card, at least the ones that the manufacturers give you, just becomes totally irrelevant when the GPU actually launches. In saying that, some of these cards, not the 3060, are still worth it even $100 to $200 over the base MSRP, so if you're sick of waiting around, that sort of pricing will likely be your best chance for a while. So really hope this video helped you out. As always, a huge thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more GPU reviews in the future based not off of MSRP, and I will see you all in the next one.